black-white binary that infused every corner of social life in British colonial South Africa, for example, inevitably entered into notions of proper dog ownership and the regulatory practices of canine animal control, whereas more general class-based civilizational anxieties of the urban bourgeoisie characterized responses in London, Paris, and New York. At a more fundamental level, time and place also raise ontological questions about whether it is even possible to think of conditions in different eras and cultures as the same disease. At the very least, historians have learned to be cautious about equating current definitions of specific medical conditions with ailments in the past. In a classic study from the 1930s, for example, Ludwig Fleck detailed the analytical divides between 20th century understandings of syphilis and the early modern category of carnal scourge. Decades later, Andrew Cunningham suggested that the laboratory and its centrality to the bacteriological revolution so transformed the mental apparatus surrounding infectious disease as to undermine any simple one-to-one correspondence between historical and present-day classifications. Changes at the molecular level or the varying ecological and social contexts of disease compound further the difficulties of historical comparison, since infectious agents themselves may change biologically over time, and local ecologies strongly condition their spread. Such realities underscore the nature of diseases as simultaneously the product of biological agents or circumstances independent of human will or consciousness, and yet profoundly social in their multiple guises. For example, as objects of human contemplation, sources of individual lived experiences with debilitation and illness, promoters of broad-based fears and social disruptions, and targets for all manner of institutionalized interventions. For rabies, these considerations require mindfulness of the shifts and continuities that defined the disease as it moved through human history. Rabies in the past was not, in a historically contingent, socially embedded sense, the product of a particular bullet-shaped rhabdovirus with an RNA-based genome covered by a glycoprotein membrane, which could be detected in the victim's saliva or other bodily fluids and tissues through polymerase chain reaction and a direct fluorescent antibody test. When early 19th century observers spoke of a virus of rabies, they had in mind a poison or toxin, and not a biologically active, self-replicating agent. By the 1880s and 1890s, germ theory and the rise of bacteriology allowed physicians, medical researchers, and public health professionals to imagine a living microbe or germ of rabies that they hoped eventually to describe more fully, but that defied visualization by the means they had on hand. Toward the end of the century, the idea of the filterable virus, a submicroscopic entity so small that it passed through the fine Chamberlain-Pasteur filter designed to trap bacteria, added a new sense of biological specificity to the rabies virus, but its precise characterization remained elusive. No one actually saw rhabdovirus until the 1960s, after the advent of electron microscopy. Nomenclature also signals important differences between historical and present-day formulations. In the 19th century, rabies, or in the case of dogs, rabies canina, referred to the dangerous transmissible form of madness in animals whose bites led humans to develop hydrophobia, the human variant of the disease. Some physicians even considered hydrophobia and rabies to be separate conditions. The distinction was hardly cut and dried, however. Stories in New York newspapers not infrequently described animals, particularly horses, cattle, and other ungulates, but occasionally dogs as well, as suffering from hydrophobia. In such instances, hydrophobia tended to indicate the suffering victim, regardless of species, as opposed to the mad, violent, salivating animal perpetrator of disease. At times, medical practitioners, such as physician and New York City public health official Charles P. Russell, in a lengthy report on hydrophobia published in 1874, also used the term somewhat interchangeably. In the 1880s, as a germ-based understanding of the condition took hold, some medical experts began to call upon the profession to abandon the term hydrophobia in favor of rabies, but the latter appellation did not fully supplant the former as the preferred label until the 1920s. Physicians on both sides of the Atlantic also distinguished between true hydrophobia and false cases, in which patients exposed to non-malign animal bites managed to scare themselves to the point of severe illness and even death. In the middle decades of the 19th century, medical essays and treatises tended to downplay the significance of false cases and view them mainly as a curiosity. In the 1880s and 1890s, however, the rise of neurology as a medical specialty, combined with burgeoning cultural anxieties about the